When you're up, you're up. When you're down, you're down. That's what you can say about the Milwaukee Brewers on their last road trip. They went to Pittsburgh and swept the Pirates, who had been playing really, really good baseball going into that series. They were red hot. But then they took on another red hot team in the Texas Rangers, and they suffered a sweep at the hands of the Rangers. So a 3-3 week, all in all. A lot of action to get to this week on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We'll have a breakdown of everything for you. But we did get our customary question again this week of how we're doing and what our plans are for the weekend. So, as always, I'll delegate to Spencer first to start us out. How are you, Spencer? And what are your plans for the weekend? I have a feeling I know the answer to both of these.
Doing well, yeah. It's definitely been it's been back in the swing of things for fall ball here for coaching, and minor league season wrapping up and the Brewers season, regular season starting to wrap up a little bit. So it's just been a lot of baseball, which is great. Watching the Packer game with my family after we're done recording tonight. So looking forward to that. And then this weekend, yeah, we've got more baseball. So it doesn't stop, and that's okay. That's what we're here for. So everything's been pretty good. How are you?
Not too bad. It's been nice to get a few days away here on the road trip. The scheduling has been so weird lately just because you had this long stretch for the Brewers of no days off. A couple of road games that I did in there as well, starting in Wrigley, and then coming back, they have a little 3-gamer and then a 3-gamer on the road. And then this whole now the off days are kind of starting to pile up too. Just the way this entire probably 3-ish weeks here has gone. It's been an interesting structure for all of this stuff, but that's the nature of the baseball schedule. Be back on the grind at American Family Field over the weekend as the Brewers come back home. Before we jump into recapping this Pirates series, we'll talk first about a quick move that the Brewers made before the start of this series. We had talked about it last week about how the Brewers were expecting to place a key reliever on the injured list, and all the signs pointed to Nick Mears. I don't think we came out and said it. We kind of laid out the surrounding context and told everyone they could surmise for themselves what it was going to be. But Nick Mears was officially placed on the injured list with a back injury. We'll have some updates on him a little bit later in the program, but he was placed on the injured list. Carlos Rodriguez was recalled to give the Brewers a little bit of depth in that bullpen as a multi-inning guy. So a little bit of shuffling in the bullpen wouldn't be the last move we would see during the week here. But let's get into some of the game action here. Really, the theme as we go throughout this entire week is going to be Jake Bauers. He had a really nice couple of games here in in Pittsburgh over the weekend. I'm getting all my NL Central teams mixed up now. This is how all over the place the schedule has been lately. Maybe because I was talking about covering the Wrigley games. But game one, the Brewers winning this one by a final of 5-2. The scoring started on a Jared Triolo error in the first inning on a William Contreras ground ball to third. That got the Brewers on the board first. Quinn Priester getting the ball in this one. Little bit of a shaky start for him. He was getting hit pretty hard the first couple innings. I think even harder than the 2 earned runs would tell you, just in terms of like how hard these balls are being struck off the bat. But credit to him on a night where the Brewers really needed someone to give them a deeper start. He was able to figure things out and go 7 innings in this one. So 7 innings for Priester, scattering 6 hits, 2 earned runs. Again, all of those coming pretty early on. Only 1 walk and 6 strikeouts for him. I just feel like for Quinn Priester, usually a pretty good indicator is going to be looking at that walk total for him. If he didn't walk a lot of guys, it was probably a pretty good outing. If he did struggle with the control a little bit more, then maybe it was one of those more in between outings, but really good stuff from him. Kind of saw some adjustments from him as the game went on too, with the curveball and the cutter and how he was using different pitches. And I think we've talked about this a few times before. Just the first step for him seemed to be just getting him in the strike zone with his 2 best pitches, like literally just throw the sinker and the slider, tunneling off each other right down the middle, just get in the strike zone. That was what I talked to him about earlier in the year. But now, probably this last month and a half here, feels like he's kind of settled into the ability to figure out what is and isn't working in a particular start. And with some help from William Contreras and some of the pitching guys, figure out as the game goes along, okay, maybe here's the adjustment I need to make to how I can attack guys, and kind of using all of his weapons that way. I think that's been the most impressive part of watching him pitch especially as he's gotten more comfortable here in Milwaukee.
Agreed. It's just been continued development pretty much the entire season. It just feels like he finds a way to improve every couple of weeks. You see something new, whether early on, like you talked about, it was kind of starting to work in the other pitches outside of the two main ones. And now it's kind of figuring out which mix to use throughout the game. And you mentioned keeping the walks down. That's something that he's improved upon over the course of the season. So, like, it's just been continued improvement pretty much week after week, start after start. And yeah, you mentioned this is a situation where they needed a starter to give him some length. And despite a rocky start, he did even more than you could probably hope for when you're looking at that. And especially in modern MLB right now, you're thinking a long start from a starter, you're probably hoping for 6, and he goes out and gives you another one and gives you 7. Like, that was really big. And for him too, on top of that, he downplayed it. And I'm sure it's not a huge deal, but it's against the team that drafted him, a team that kind of gave up on him and shipped him off in kind of a lotto ticket deal. I'm sure there was a little bit of a extra motivation, or maybe a little bit extra, just in terms of how it feels to be able to go out and have a performance like that against that team. So it was a cool start for him, but also something the Brewers really badly needed. And I think it really encapsulated everything we've talked about since he got here, and just in terms of how he's improved and what he's done differently to get to the point where he's now somebody the Brewers and myself and pretty much anyone who follows the Brewers, I think, has to feel pretty comfortable with every time he goes out there.
I mentioned Jake Bauers at the start of the recap. He hit a go-ahead 2-run single in the 6th to give the Brewers the lead, and then Bryce Terang and Andrew Vaughn each adding insurance runs with RBI singles in the 8th and 9th innings, respectively. Game 2, the Brewers once again winning over the Pirates, this time a 4-1 score. It was Jake Bauers again opening the scoring, this time with a 2-run homer in the 4th. Jackson Chourio then hitting a 2-run homer in the 8th, and that would account for all 4 of Milwaukee's runs on those 2 swings. Brandon Woodruff, though, was really the highlight of this one. After a couple of not-so-great starts, he was back on the horse in this one. 6 innings for him, 2 hits, didn't walk anybody, struck out 8. And just watching this one, eye test, I was thinking this really looked like the best command I had seen him have probably in any start since that Marlins one. I did go back and look at the game logs. So Location Plus had the Arizona start, the Diamondback start, as his second best, which, looking back, I would believe that as well, because we had talked about it during that start about how he actually threw the ball a lot better in that one than the line would show you. But this was what needs to be considered now, I think, the peak version of this version of Brandon Woodruff. This is what it's going to look like for him, and kind of what it needs to look like for him if he's going to be having these kind of results. Like, it does need to be a little more command-based than it's been in the past, because the stuff can blow guys away still, as we've seen, but that really only happens when the sequences are set up the right way and different things like that, and he's hitting certain spots. So it was good to see a nice outing from him, though, just to show that he is still capable of these kind of performances. And you kind of look at where he's sitting now. He's sitting on like a 3.3 ERA with largely matching peripherals. xERA still really loves him because his quality of contact metrics are really, really good. But I think we're kind of seeing things settle into, this is kind of the baseline of where a Brandon Woodruff, who averages 92, 93, touching 95, this is kind of the baseline of where that version of him, I think, is going to reside in terms of the results.
Yeah, and that's still a pretty dang good pitcher. Even better than I think we both kind of predicted it would wind up landing. And we kind of talked about kind of upper threes as maybe that would be a really successful season for him in his return. And I think we are settling into that kind of 3.3, maybe 3.5 range for him, and that feeling like that's the true talent, and that's quite good. I mean, that's a really, really productive starting pitcher. And like you said, it's a little different than it has been. We've talked about that a lot. I think you're exactly right, though, that command is going to have to be like in the past. Woodruff's always had pretty good command, even though he had very good stuff. It was always the combination, which is why he was one of the best starters in baseball prior to his injury. But now, back then, he could get away with a mistake way more often than he can get away with the mistakes now. Like there's still going to be some because the stuff is still pretty good despite lower velocity. But guys will hit a 93 mile per hour mistake more often than they'll hit a 97 mile per hour mistake. That's just the truth of it. Doesn't matter if they both have the same shape. Less velo will get hit harder on a fastball if you put it in the wrong spot more often. And he just can't afford to have those as often. And we've seen that he's capable of, for the most part, avoiding putting things in less than ideal spots in hitters, hitters zones. And this, I agree with you. Like watching it, I felt like this was as good as we'd seen from the debut. But now that you bring up that Arizona game, like until that final inning, he was dominating that game. Like he looked really, really good in that start until that final inning where things kind of snowballed on him. So I'd buy that too. But this was definitely really, really nice to see, especially after the recent Blue Jays outing where I think he probably had his worst game since returning, just in terms of process and results, obviously. So just nice to see a pretty quick bounce back there into the form that we know he's capable of. And also just to see it, he's getting a little deeper into the season, the innings count starting to climb up. Like there was at least in the back of my head after that Blue Jays game, like, oh, I wonder if he's just starting to wear down a little bit in his return, which would be somewhat understandable. But I think we pretty quickly saw that that's not the case. I think that was a little bit more of an outlier than anything else. So, yeah, overall, good outing from Woodruff, really good outing from Woodruff. And definitely, I mean, this is the way it's going to have to work. And he's shown he can do it pretty consistently so far.
Given the status of the A bullpen between injuries and recent workload for certain guys, Pat Murphy having to go to some of the other guys to try to close this one out, which, again, good on him for doing that. I'm sure that's not easy for him because we've talked a lot about how competitive he is and how he likes to push these guys. But going to guys like Eric Fetty, Rob Zastryzny, Tobias Myers, I think he probably could. I kind of would have liked to see Myers get a little more of a leash. He put two guys on base, and I don't think he looked that bad. But Murph had a pretty quick trigger finger there, ended up going to Aaron Ashby to record the final 5 outs, which, again, I mean, Ashby was your guy who you would have available there, so I don't really have an issue with asking that out of him. But I do think you're kind of in this space, especially as you're looking forward to the playoffs, and we'll kind of revisit this in a couple minutes here when we talk about somebody else. But I do think that, you can't take your foot completely off the gas pedal, but I think the Brewers are in a situation right now where you do need to start giving guys room to feel things out to see if they can be contributors on the postseason roster for what's hopefully going to be a deep playoff run. And that's kind of the hump where I'm like, is Murph going to be able to get over that hump where he's willing to do that a little bit more? Again, you got to give him credit for actually like pitching Eric Fetty in a close game and pitching Tobias Myers in a close game and Rob Zastryzny. Like those are guys who do need to be getting action to make sure that you're taking the load off these other guys. So that's good. But then again, like really, really quick trigger with these guys, especially like at the time when Ashby came in, it was still a 4-run lead.
Yeah.
So, like those are the situation, and it's against the Pirates too. The Pirates don't hit. So like those are the situations where I'm still thinking, okay, I do think you do need to kind of figure out what that balance is of, yes, we can't let our foot off the gas pedal because you can't just throw in the towel and expect that you can just turn it back on when October starts. And by the way, you haven't clinched anything officially yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can't go into full feel it out mode, but I do wonder if there's a little bit more room here to kind of give those guys a little bit of leash. I think this is a really good opportunity for it. And again, I'm glad that those guys got in the game, but I do wonder if at the same time you could have said, okay, maybe we can push them a little bit more just to see what happens here. I understand it was still a close-ish game, but this kind of felt like an opportunity where you could have maybe gone that extra mile and say, okay, Tobias Myers, you get a chance to try to work out of this, and we can see a little bit more of, what are you looking like out of the bullpen? What kind of capacity could you help us in? Things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to the Mets series last year, and I don't think Murph would have, going into that series, ideally wanted Nick Mears to be going out there, given what he had done with the Brewers so far, and trying to get pretty big outs in a winner-take-all game. but he had to. And that was the situation that arose. And that was what they had in the bullpen for available players and the situation that came up. And he went to him and he obviously got the job done. But this is an opportunity, I think, like you're talking about, to give a guy like Myers a chance to go in a pretty, it's a bad Pirates lineup, but it was a good part of their order. Like the one decently dangerous part of their order was coming up. But like you said, the tying run was on deck. It wasn't even like the tying runs at the plate. So it's not like the game can completely get flipped with one swing there. Yes, they could hit a homer and make it a 1-run game, or hit a gapper and make it a 2-run game, and the tying runs at the plate and the whatever. There are things that could happen that could quickly make it a little bit more of a concerning moment for the Brewers. But that's a spot where I think you let Myers go out there. You give him the opportunity to work through in a spot that's not crazy high leverage, but it's leverage and it's towards the end of the game, and give him that opportunity because you might need him to do that in a game in the playoffs. It might not even be in the first round. It might not be, it could be later on, but like there's a chance you're going to need that at some point just due to lack of rest, short starts. You're going to have a quick trigger with starters in the bullpen. Like guys end up needing to pitch in moments that maybe you wouldn't prefer. And I think if they have the opportunity to do it in the regular season, especially against, like you said, an offense like the Pirates, to even just get a little confidence potentially by getting through that spot, I think that can help. And it also could give you a little more confidence in putting them into the game when it needs to happen in the playoffs. So, yeah, I think that's a spot where they could have maybe gone and found that balance that you talked about. But I think the one we're going to talk about in a few minutes is the one I'll probably have a little stronger feelings on.
We'll finish up the series here. The Brewers with a blowout win in Game 3, 10-2 over Pittsburgh. Jake Bauers again, hitting a 2-run double as part of a 4-run first inning. I want to stop for just a second to talk about Jake Bauers too. Pretty much as soon as he had like a couple good games here, that was really all I needed to see to, as we'll talk about, mention that Jake Bauers probably was never really going to lose his roster spot with Rhys Hoskins coming back. This is a guy that the Brewers like him for a reason, and you still keep seeing the little spurts of that. I understand he's wildly, wildly streaky, and I just wrote about this as this series is going on. Like going into this series here, I believe he was in like, I don't remember what the exact number is. It was like another one of those like 4 for 38 stretches where the batting average is all of a sudden down around 180. He's got like a 650 OPS, and you're wondering why is this guy still on the roster? But then he shows you with games like this and hot streaks like this about how good it all looks when everything is coming together for him. This is still a guy who he's like right on that borderline of too much swing and miss to expect consistent production. And we've talked about this before too. Like there's most hitters are to some degree streaky in baseball. That's just the nature of the sport. But Bauers is even beyond that. Like you look at what his stretches look like. You look at like a rolling graph of his results, and it is pretty all over the place. A lot of ups and downs. But he's right on the borderline of, is he not making enough contact to produce? Because we talked about this all the time with Keston Hiura. He's not as bad as Keston Hiura, but it's like he's kind of riding on that fence right now with like a 30% strikeout rate and like a 30% average whiff rate per swing. But the swing decisions are really, really good. This guy does not chase. So he's got that going for him. He's usually a guy who can get on base at an okay clip, even when things aren't going well in the results department elsewhere. Defense is okay at first base, but there's still a lot of power in this bat. Like this is a guy who has the capability to hit the ball really hard, really far. You know, everybody talks about the home run that he hit off the bench in the playoffs last year. I don't think that was as improbable as a lot of people painted it to be. Like those are the kind of swings that he's capable of, and we'll talk about the move when we get there as well. He did end up staying on the roster, which again, not shocking to me. I think there's a reason why the Brewers have stuck by this guy for almost 2 years now, even as he's hitting for like I think he hit for like an 80 OPS plus last year. He is back up a few ticks over the league average now after this hot stretch that he's been on here. But I mean, swing decisions are good. There's a lot of power potential there. And this is a guy who I think in the right kind of role is more than capable of, if you get him in the right matchup at the right time, he can deliver a big swing. So one of those guys where as you're looking forward to a playoff series, can serve like a very specific role, pretty much exactly like he did last year, coming off the bench, hit for Rhys Hoskins against a tough righty and pop a big home run. I would not be shocked if the Brewers are hoping he can do something similar in the postseason this year, and that's why they're riding it out with him for the rest of the season, and they're going to roster 3 first basemen through September here.
Yeah, Jake Bauers, when his back seems to be up against the wall or everybody's about ready to give up on him, is one of the best hitters in baseball. It seems like he just always figures it out right as everyone's kind of ready to give up on him. And I don't know that the Brewers are at that point very often, but I mean they non-tendered him this offseason. I think they've gotten to that point before where it's like, it's probably not worth what we're paying or whatever. I think they're pretty happy they were able to bring him back this year. And like you said, there's a very real role for him even into the playoffs. And I also agree with what you started with, though. If he had come back and it had been a struggle up until the point that Hoskins was going to be activated, it may have been a little bit of a different story if he didn't show that coming off of this recent injury that he was kind of back swinging the bat well. If he didn't show much of anything in that opportunity he was given, because I think they were planning to give him a decent amount of at-bats and see what he could show. And I'm guessing it was a little bit of a tryout in terms of like, hey, we need to see that you can at least swing the bat well. Like it doesn't need to be results, but we got to see a good process. We got to see you hit the ball hard sometimes and see that what we know you're capable of is still in there after this injury. And once they saw that, there was no chance he was going to be the casualty in the Rhys Hoskins move. It was going to be someone else. And like we said, we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, this was impressive. I mean, it was a lot of really good swings. Like you said, when he hits the ball, it goes. He hits the ball hard. He hits the ball about as hard as anyone on the team when he's especially in a groove like he was for these 2 series, really. But yeah, he's got a role and he's comfortable and he's learned how to be that in that pinch hitting role and to be able to prepare himself to step in and take a swing when you've been sitting all game. And it's not an easy thing to do. And the fact that he has the history of doing it in the playoffs last year, like I'm sure that makes the Brewers and a guy like Murph even more prepared to use him in that type of role again, because they know he's capable of it. They've seen it and he has a good routine. Rhys Hoskins talked about it when he came back, actually, that's somebody he's kind of pointing to as somebody that like, okay, this is how he gets ready when he's not starting regularly to still be ready to show up and take a big at bat if needed. So yeah, it was good to see Bauers back, and he definitely earned the opportunity to stay on the roster. And like you said, I think he's a guy that you're going to see get a big at bat at some point in the playoffs, assuming everything goes as planned for the Brewers up until that point.
I'm going to quickly rattle down the rest of the offensive performance here today. I'm not going to go through each run scoring hit because really there was no big swing in this one. It was just kind of a string of everybody up and down the lineup, just kind of adding on. 14 hits, 7 walks, and then 6 of the 9 hitters in the lineup drove in runs in this game. So Bryce Terang was 2 for 3, had a couple walks. I mentioned Bauers 2 for 4 with that double, drew a walk as well. Andrew Vaughn 4 for 5 with a double. We're not going to talk about him as much as we should this week because he had a very, very good road trip, especially after the results started trending back down for him, just some natural regression, but a very, very good road trip for Andrew Vaughn. Blake Perkins 2 for 4 with a double. So that was what we saw on the offensive side. Jacob Mizorowski, not to bury him either, because he was a very important part of this story as well. Completing 7 innings for the first time in a big league start, 3 hits, 1 run, couple of walks, and 8 Ks. And really what was key for me was, and kind of what we've seen in the successful Mizorowski starts, is something's not going his way early, and he very quickly is able to figure it out and kind of settle in from there. So in this one, he walked. Those 2 walks he had were the first 2 hitters of the game in this one. Chris Hook came out for a mound visit. He was able to kind of work through some stuff, got a couple of balls on the ground there to help him get out of it. But then even in the second inning, not looking great, gave up a couple of hard hit balls in that inning, but again, able to work his way out of it. And then able to go 7. He was really efficient after those first 2 innings as well, which played a big role in him being able to go that deep. These are just the kind of outings that you look for to see growth from a young guy. And you got to be careful to not fall into the trap of, well, just because we saw it in this one, that doesn't mean it's going to be there every single start or the response is going to look the same every single start, but it's always a good thing when you see something like this.
Absolutely. He's not stacking them back to back a ton, but we are starting to see over the course of his time in the big leagues enough starts where he can show that he can do stuff like this, where you feel like as he grows and matures, and similar to what we talked about a little bit last week with, like, we saw Corbin Burns obviously is the biggest example of a guy who really, really struggled early on as a starter, but Woodruff and Freddie Peralta, both as starters, struggled at times with the big inning and struggled to be able to get through some of those things early in their career. But you saw enough flashes that you knew they were going to figure it out eventually. Um, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing with Miz this year. I think we've seen enough for me to feel pretty comfortable. And I wouldn't have said it coming into the year. I know you certainly wouldn't have either, Jack, but like, I feel very comfortable with him as a starter moving forward. Now, there's going to be continual bumps in the road in his career. I'm saying not necessarily this year. We had that whole talk last week, but in his career, I think he's a starter, and I think he's going to continue to be one. And I think he's going to start to figure out how to more often work through some of those tough innings, slow start, dealing with some of the things like we talked about in Cincinnati with a mound that he doesn't like. And actually, I can't remember which start it was, but he had the mound fixed for him when he was having some struggles with it in a recent start. And even that is just, to me, that's a little sign of growth, of saying like, hey, you don't have to fight the mound. They will fix it for you. Like, that's part of what they do at the big leagues. Like, you can say, hey,
That was in this start.
was it in this start?
It
Yeah,
was toward the end of the start, but yeah, it was because I remember the TV cut back to it. He was going back out there for the start of the inning. He threw a couple warm-ups,
that's right.
and then all of a sudden it cuts to you see the grounds crew patching up his landing spot.
Yeah, and, like, that's something where a young player might not even think about it, because in the minor leagues, they're not doing that for you, and it's something that you're just annoyed by, and instead of trying to find a solution, you just kinda just let it snowball on you. And I think here he sees, like, okay, landing spot's a little messed up. I can ask them to fix it. They'll fix it, and we're good. And then he was able to work through. I think that was probably before the sixth. So I think he had two more innings after that. But yeah, those are the types of things I think you're seeing him just kind of figure things out at the big league level. And like you said, this is not something that you can expect every time out from anybody, frankly, but especially from a guy like Miz early in his career. But I think you're starting to just see more and more like, he can do this. This is something we already felt comfortable with early on after his first few starts, but just now that you're seeing him learn from different things and kind of figure things out on the fly still, it's something where even next year, I'm sure there's going to be struggles. There's going to be bad innings. There's going to be stuff like that. Every starter has it to a degree, but even more for young guys. But I think we've seen a lot of growth from him just in a lot of those ways. And it's nice to see. Like I said, I still don't really know what the playoff role for sure is going to be. But this on its own just gives me a lot of hope for him as a future starter, as somebody who can take the ball every 5 games and be a really nice piece of the Brewers rotation in the future.
It's been kind of funny for me going from, like you just said, I was very much on the train of I don't think this guy is ever really going to be a starter just because it looked to me like there's so many hurdles that he's got to clear for it to work as a starter. But he then to go from that to then seeing how he pretty much crossed a lot of those hurdles in AAA to the point where by the time he was making this big league start, and since then I've been fully on board with him as a starter. And now I'm seeing, like some fans are saying it. I've even talked to like some media people who are saying, man, they should really consider bumping him to the bullpen or they should change the role. And now I'm the one who's saying, no, he needs to keep starting games because he's like, I understand it's been inconsistent from start to start, but now he's showing me all the things that I had needed to see for the longest time that I didn't think I was going to see, that show you he deserves the runway. Like, he's got a
Yeah,
4-pitch arsenal now. I've seen him command all 4 of those pitches at varying times throughout this stint. I've seen him respond to certain things. I've seen him limit walks in some of these starts. It's still not amazing, but I think it's been good enough that, you can kind of see the path as a starter. Like, all these building blocks are here now. So now as the results are up and down, that's not really what I'm looking at right now. I'm still looking at all the things that he needs to be a starter. You're seeing some degree of it in there. So now it's giving him the runway as best you can to keep developing that stuff.
Exactly.
Last thing I want to talk about from this game that'll kind of take us into our next topic is Craig Yoho got a chance to close this one out, and this was his first appearance back in the big leagues since he was called up as the extra pitcher for expanded rosters at the start of September. And Spence, I know you had noted it. I believe someone else had pointed it out first, and you kind of caught wind of it as well. He shortened the breaking ball up, so instead of throwing the big curveball, now it's a shorter slider. So I talked to him about that on the last homestand, and I also asked him about moving over on the rubber because he's also moved over full time to the first base side of the rubber. If you can remember before, for most of his pro career, he was really far on the third base side because he wants to be right on top of the hitter and make the movement to a righty look super extreme or just super uncomfortable. And then for a lot of this year, he was going back and forth between third base side for righties, first base side for lefties. And he told me that finally they all just kind of decided, why don't we just go to the first base side? Because it's going to help everything track in the strike zone more. It's going to open up like your perceived view of the plate too. It's going to make it look like you have more space to target, like a wider window to shoot for. And something else that he said too is a lot of times, actually, if you're pitching from the first base side and you have arm side movement, like it's actually going to make the arm side movement look a little bit more extreme. Yes, you're not quite starting on top of the guy. So in that sense, maybe it's not as uncomfortable, but he said like the perceived arm side movement when you're on the first base side and it's coming across the entire strike zone like that, it can actually play up a little bit if you know how to use that. So all these changes that he's made in Nashville, this is the first time that we got to see them in the big league since that promotion. And it was like exactly what you think the Craig Yoho experience can look like with more time. Perfect inning, struck out 2 guys, 7 out of 10 pitches for strikes. This was a really, really good outing, which is why it was a little disappointing for me to see that he was the casualty before the Rangers series when the Brewers activated Grant Anderson. They optioned Craig Yoho back down to Nashville. And I know you have plenty of thoughts on this as well, but to me, I really think that this is a guy who, especially after the injuries started piling up, I was saying this is a guy who actually should be getting some leverage work now as part of kind of what we just talked about a few minutes ago, where like you need to see what you got in some of these guys. And the stuff is still so good for Craig Yoho. The movement is still so good that I really think that they should have tried to use September as a window to see like how much can this guy help us in the postseason, because the ceiling is still as high as just about anybody in this bullpen. I understand there have been the command issues, but again, he's worked on all this stuff in Nashville. I don't know that there's a whole lot left for him down there because early in the year we said, okay, yes, he does need to go back to AAA and work on some adjustments and figure this stuff out. Well, he's done that now. So now I'm not quite sure what is there to be gained for him now in AAA. And again, I understand you got to send guys down, but Yoel Payamps is back on the roster. Like you could have tried to pass Payamps through waivers again. I don't think that's a huge loss. And I'm saying this as someone who has been a pretty big Yoel Payamps believer. And even now, I don't think he's that far away yet from where he used to be. I know the results are way different, but I actually think that line is a lot smaller than people realize. But even so, I would rather have Craig Yoho on this roster right now to see what he can do.
Yes. I mean, after the outing in Pittsburgh, I had tweeted, like, this is what we just saw, especially after reading your article and learning a little bit more about some of the changes and stuff. And then we see him go put it into action, and it looks exactly how you're hoping it will look. Like, this reminded me, honestly, of like a prime Devin Williams when he just would go real quick through an inning. Like he'd have those innings sometimes where it wasn't always. Devin would like to expand or extend innings with some walks and some pitches all over the place at times too. But he would have some innings where it would just be like, yep, they swung at the changeup 4 times, weren't close to it, blew a couple fastballs on the outside corner past them, boom, inning done, 1 soft ground out. That's it. That's what it looked like. And it's the Pirates. It was a blowout. Not saying this is where we were headed with Yoho right now, is into some prime Devin Williams type of performance. But like you said, this is a guy with one of the higher ceilings in the entire bullpen. or just entire system of guys who would be available to pitch in the bullpen. You're looking ahead and you have this opportunity in September. You don't know, like, yes, you hope Mears is back and healthy and pitching better than he was down towards the end of his time being healthy. You're hoping McGill's good after this injury and things are trending well. But you're down Shelby Miller. You're dealing with overworked guys at the back of the pen right now in terms of someone like Abner Uribe, who's pitched a ton this year. You don't know exactly what you're going to get down the stretch and into the playoffs because it feels like at some point probably going to hit a bit of a wall. And you have an opportunity to potentially get a guy into a spot where you would feel comfortable, even to the level of what you had with Mears last year, of putting him into a game, in a playoff game, and saying, you know what, he gives us a pretty good shot to get through this inning cleanly. And that's all you needed to try and find out from him, is if he could get you to that point. And it might have gone beyond that, then it might not have worked out. But to only give him one outing with these legitimate changes in hand, like you talked about, we didn't even see the slider or the sweeper in this outing. So I was hoping we'd get to see how that played with the changes to that and shortening it up in a little bit. Like, we didn't even get to see that. After his best outing in the big leagues, that just felt like the time to try and build on that and give yourself a chance to get a guy who could help you in the playoffs. And like you said, you've always been higher on Payams than I am, but I've never been like a Payams hater. I like Payams. Payams gave a really good season 2 years ago. He had a really good second half last year. And I agree that the results weren't really indicative of how he was pitching this year, even despite how bad they really were. Like, that was not an indicator of how he was pitching truly and how the stuff played. The stuff was pretty much the same as it's been. But I don't think even the version of, like, the better version of Payams that you could possibly get this year is going to outperform the good version of what Yoho can be. And you could have had an opportunity here to give him that runway, like you talked about, to go out and, sure, some of the outings might have come in games like this one in Pittsburgh. Maybe it is another 10-2 game where the Brewers are down by 3 runs when he comes in. But then maybe he does well in that a couple times, and all of a sudden he gets a game with a 2 or 3 run lead in the 7th inning. And now it's like, hey, show us what you're made of. Show us you can handle a little bit more pressure. And then he takes that, and you keep building on it. And it just feels like a missed opportunity. And like you said, this isn't a case of let's send him back to Nashville and have him work on this stuff again. He's done that. That part's done. He's figured that stuff out to a point where, even in your article, I believe it was your article I was reading, where he talked about basically what we had said we hoped they would do. And that was go down there and don't worry about results. We want you working on things that are going to help you in the big leagues. And he did that. The results were still good because his stuff is too good for AAA. It doesn't really matter how he does it. It's going to work. But he changed the process to a point where it looked like it was something that could work in the big leagues. And I don't very often get upset about, like, promotion, demotion type of moves during the season. I think for the most part, it doesn't really matter because guys will get their opportunity and they'll take advantage of it. But the clock is ticking on that being able to be the case here. And this time for Yoho, which means this was kind of the chance he had in my eyes. Now, an injury could change that because they could bring him back quicker than the 15 days. But if nobody gets hurt, he can't be back until like the last week of the regular season, if they even bring him back. And at that point, he doesn't have the runway to try and figure out what you have for the playoffs. And to me, it was a mistake. And I think I tweeted that, and some people thought I was talking about the fact that they were bringing back Anderson, and that's not the case. I like Grant Anderson a lot. I think Grant Anderson deserves a roster spot too, for sure. But this is more related to the Payamses of the world. I think right now they're keeping Fedde around because he can give you some length. They kept Carlos Rodriguez around a little bit until they were able to bring up Patrick, another guy who can give length. Like, they need some of these guys to be able to provide some length. So I understand. But for me, the potential of losing a guy like Payams to waivers, who you already have had that opportunity to have happen this year, you already put him through waivers once. Now it's at the point of the season where even if a team claims him, they can't put him on the playoff roster. You can work around that. Injuries, you can make it work a little bit. But I also think the Brewers are going to non-tender him at the end of the season. So this isn't a guy that they're planning. I would be shocked if they tender him a contract. So to me, there's very little risk in exposing him to waivers. And then the upside with Yoho is what you're missing out on by not doing so. And I just disagree with that. I think it's the wrong way to handle this situation. I don't think that was the way they should have gone. And I think they're missing an opportunity here to potentially make themselves better as they hit the stretch run for what they're hoping is going to be a deep playoff run. And every little move on the margins is usually the stuff that the Brewers do super well. And I just, to me, this is one of those times where they're kind of missing the opportunity to do that.
The one thing I can think of that they might be considering in doing this is if you send Craig Yoho back to Nashville, that ensures that he keeps pitching on a pretty structured schedule, that he's going to keep getting work as opposed to maybe being up here and sitting in the big league bullpen. And, with how Murph uses some of these guys, like maybe you just don't know how often Craig Yoho is actually going to pitch if he's up here. Maybe that's part of the calculus. But again, then my response is, well, then just make sure he pitches up here. We just talked about all
Mandate
this
it.
stuff. Like the situation that the Brewers are in, I think you have the ability now to make sure a guy like Craig Yoho gets into some games, no matter what the score is, and you just see what you've got in him. So, maybe they are thinking of it in terms of they just think it's better for his routine to be down there. But I think there are ways you could have made it work up here. And again, I just don't know, especially now that he's gone down there and, like we said, made these adjustments. Now I'm not sure there's a whole lot left for him to do in AAA. Like, it just kind of feels like, for lack of a better way to phrase it, you're just kind of twiddling your thumbs and just kind of staying in place
Yeah.
as opposed to using the time you have left to now figure some things out at the game's highest level and keep getting a little better and see what you have moving forward.
Yeah. I agree. I think, like you said, that could absolutely be part of the thought process. But then in my mind, that's like you kind of mentioned, like that's a time where the front office has to go, hey, we are keeping Craig Yoho on this roster for a reason. We need you to get him innings, whatever you feel fit, but he needs to be pitching on a semi-regular basis. You can use him in whatever role you feel it works best, but he needs to be getting a couple, 2, maybe 3 outings a week minimum to make sure he's getting regular work. And also we can find out what we have. I think they could have absolutely done that. And yeah, I'm sure that's part of why this happened, but like you said, I think they could have very easily worked around that still.
So that was the move that the Brewers made before the Rangers series. And like I mentioned at the start of the show, kind of a tale of two series here. The Brewers taking care of business in Pittsburgh, winning all 3 games, and then they ran into a buzzsaw Rangers team that is clawing back into that playoff race in the American League. Texas taking all 3 games for the Brewers. First sweep suffered since that opening day massacre in New York. So we'll start with game 1. This is the most decisive Texas victory, 5-0. Jose Quintana got the ball in this one, and he did work into the 7th inning, 6 2/3 for him. But 4 hits allowed, 5 earned runs, couple walks and 4 Ks. Michael Hellman, who became the Brewers' nemesis in this series, journeyman minor leaguer who is really getting his first extended shot at age 29 here. Utility guy, played center field in this series, though. Michael Hellman drove in all 5 runs off of Jose Quintana. That said, I think as I was watching the broadcast, it felt like that was being used as a way to say, well, Quintana actually had a really good start for like 95% of this one, but just made a couple bad pitches to one hitter. I can absolutely understand like how that might seem like a takeaway, especially as you're watching the results in that game and kind of how the game is unfolding. But to me, as you take a deeper look at this one, yes, I do think a lot of his worst pitches came against Michael Hellman, but 2 walks, a 25% barrel rate, a 55% hard hit rate. There were at least 3 well-struck fly balls, including 2 barreled fly balls that were caught in the outfield near the warning track. I don't know if I would say this was a good outing outside of Michael Hellman. I don't think it was, by Jose Quintana standards, a terrible outing by any stretch, but I, I don't know if he was fantastic outside of one guy who got to him. I think there were a couple of instances where he probably got away with some not so great pitches or some loud contact, and that is always going to be part of the game for him. He's pitching to the defense. That's what he does. But I would say that this is much more of I don't know, a mediocre start instead of like a mediocre start top to bottom as opposed to a good start minus one hitter who got to him.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And this ballpark showed that you can get away with some hard, loud contact to the outfield. It I couldn't believe some of the balls that didn't leave the park for both teams, and especially in this one for both teams. But yeah, I even just watching it, it didn't really feel like he was pitching all that well. And obviously, the results were holding pretty fine until the Hellman grand slam. But yeah, I would say mediocre until the grand slam, and then it turns into a pretty below average start at that point once you factor all of it in on the whole. So yeah, it's not like he was doing anything that much differently than he normally does, but ball was getting hit hard, and I think the playing conditions helped him out in terms of the field and kind of how the ball was carrying all series.
So it was a shutout for the Brewers offense, but really the takeaway is Christian Yelich coming back after missing 5 days with a flare up in his back. To see him come back and then hit all four of his balls really hard, including a 106-mile-an-hour flyout and a 105-mile-an-hour flyout, that's a really good sign, especially because in the past when the back has flared up, you can tell it's just kind of I mean, it's just, for lack of a better term, just kind of ruined his ability to do anything, which is understandable because your back is quite literally involved in every single movement. But to see him come back after that little tweak and then just kind of pick up right where he left off was certainly a very good sign.
Yeah, absolutely, and he was definitely one of the victims of the I don't even remember what their current stadium is called, but yeah, just the way the ball was carrying. I mean, I thought the first ball he hit was going out for sure, and it did not. But yeah, no, really nice to see him hit, and like you said, not even just like the back in general being a problem, but for Yelich in general, he usually tends to just struggle with timing when he returns from any sort of extended absence. And that's such a big part of his game. We talked about that a lot early in the season. So to see him immediately just kind of jump in and have no issues being on time and hitting the ball hard, it was all very nice to see for sure.
Ahead of game two, that's when the Brewers would make a couple more roster moves that we teased earlier in the show. So Rhys Hoskins back off the IL. Anthony Siegler was the casualty going to the minor leagues. Again, nothing too surprising there. And then Carlos Rodriguez going down to make room for Chad Patrick, who would get the start in this one because the Brewers wanted to push their guys back an extra day here as we get down the stretch. So Rhys Hoskins, it sounds like it's going to be a more limited role for him, which I guess I'm not shocked by, but there was a part of me that was kind of wondering if they would find ways with the DH and Yelich, and even if it's getting Isaac Collins a little more time at third base, I felt like there were some ways, or maybe they didn't have to come out and say right away it's going to be a more limited role. But then you always wonder how much of that hinges on do you how much do you trust Isaac Collins to play defense at third base? Because he had been an infielder before, never a great defensive infielder, and then you actually look, he's like never really played any third base, even in the minor leagues. So I think I would imagine it's still an option because he hit for Durbin against the low slot righty, and those are the kind of pitchers the Brewers used Siegler to shield him from, not just righties, but like low slot righties. Those are the guys that Durbin does not hit. And that's who Siegler got most of the starts against. So Collins pinch hit for one and finished a game out at third base earlier in the series. But it seems like, I don't know for sure, maybe they're still in the process of kind of figuring out how viable that is, but it's going to be a limited role for Rhys Hoskins. He did come off the bench a couple times in some big spots. So maybe kind of a preview for how the Brewers are going to use him. He's a guy who I would imagine he doesn't like it, but he is a consummate professional, and he's not someone who's going to get in the way of that or cause any disruption over it. So he's back. Hopefully, someone who's going to be able to help the Brewers in some capacity, give you some thump off the bench or in kind of a part-time starting role. And then Anthony Siegler, we've talked about him plenty, but I do still think this is a guy to watch in 2026 as somebody who could be helping the Brewers again. Nobody who watched Isaac Collins take a few at bats in 2024 or his first few at bats of 2025 thought that Isaac Collins was going to be any good. And then look at what Isaac Collins is doing now. So I definitely think that Siegler falls into that pretty similar camp where I do think he needed to be the move here, but still a lot of things to like in that profile. And I would not be shocked if he ends up contributing quite a bit next season.
Yeah, I think on Siegler, like you head into the offseason, now he's kind of learned some things about playing in the big leagues, and it gives him an opportunity to specifically work on some stuff that he maybe was starting to get exposed by, or things that he found that pitchers were doing to give him trouble, and also understanding that there was still some not great luck, especially early on in the big league tenure, that kind of hurt the overall numbers and made everything look a little bit worse. But also goes into the offseason now with an opportunity to understand that he's probably going to be playing more third base than he had never played it before this season. So now you get an opportunity to kind of focus on that a little bit more. And yeah, I definitely will not rule out him being helpful for the Brewers in 2026. But on Reese, like, I do wonder if they'll take the opportunity to build in some of those Yelich rest days against lefty starters and have Vaughn and Reese in the lineup, just as one of them at DH, one of them at first. That could be a way to get him some starts and stuff still. But yeah, I mean, he said all the right things. Like you said, he's a professional. He understands. I think he knew this was probably going to be a decent chance that this was going to be the reality after watching how Vaughn performed while he was out. And you mentioned like Vaughn really stepped things back up results wise on this road trip, but well, I don't buy that necessarily the process was as good as maybe some of the expected stats were saying during his entire run, because I think he had a lot of like 90 plus mile per hour fly balls to like straightaway center, which just aren't actually that well hit. But in terms of expected batting average, when you don't have the spray and everything involved, like some of it starts to look a little bit better than I think some of the swings actually were. But even then, he still was in a decent spot process wise, even during the struggles. So to see him get back on track now, right as Hoskins was coming back, like I think he was aware this was probably going to be the case. I'm sure he didn't want it to be the case. I'm sure he doesn't want it to be the case right now. And ideally, he's probably hoping he can get an opportunity to take his spot back if he gets the chance. But he's saying the right things. I think he's about the right things legitimately. I don't think it's all just talk. And he can be a threat off the bench, kind of like we talked about with Bowers, maybe against lefties instead of righties. And you have the opportunity to have, from both sides of the plate, two guys who could step into a big moment with bases, a couple guys on base, chance to swing a game and have the power and the ability to do so. And that's a nice little luxury to have for the Brewers as they head into, these games where winning on the margins and having something like that can really play a big role.
So those are the moves the Brewers made ahead of game 2. Let's actually break it down a little bit here. So didn't end up being that impactful because the Brewers would go on to lose the game. But one of the plays you'd put a star next to if they did hang on to this one, Sal Frelick with an outfield assist. In the second inning, he got Alejandro Osuna at third base. That helped Patrick wiggle out of that inning with just one run instead of becoming a bigger inning. And then it looked even bigger, too, because the Brewers grabbed the lead with a 3-run fifth inning. Christian Yelich hit an RBI single to keep RBI infield single back to the mound to keep things going. And then William Contreras with a 2 RBI single as well. Unfortunately, Chad Patrick in the bottom half, after what was a pretty strong start to his outing, there was a lot of swing and miss early with that cutter and then the high fastball off of it. Kind of a recurring issue in a lot of his starts, even when he was up here for an extended stretch in the first half, just not being able to finish things off. 4 1/3 for him. Ran into a lot of trouble in the fifth inning. It was part of a 4-run fifth that saw Texas grab that lead back. 4 1/3 for Patrick. 3 hits, 3 earned runs, 3 walks, 6 strikeouts. But looking more specifically at that fifth inning, got the first guy out and then got 0-2 to Jonah Heim, ends up walking him, and that kind of sets off this chain of events here with 1 out. Hellman, again, coming up, hitting a game-tying home run in this one. That forces Pat Murphy to go and Aaron Ashby. Aaron Ashby gives up 3 straight hits for a couple more runs, and then for some reason stayed in the game to pitch another inning and ended up throwing 30 pitches in a game the Brewers lost. Again, this is the stuff that I don't think should be happening, because for a guy who's already in some precarious territory with the workload. I understand you're still in the game at that point, but it's not over yet. But once you're down by a couple, you can't be keeping him in and milking extra pitches out of him in a game that you don't come back in. Like, that's just not sustainable process. And again, especially in the situation the Brewers are in, where I don't think you always need to play it like that, but I digress. Let's look at the offensive side because, I say all this stuff about how Ashby pitched in the game the Brewers threw 30 pitches in a game the Brewers lost, but from a process standpoint, you actually could make the argument that, maybe they should have outscored Texas in this one because they did crush some hard hit outs. Hellman robbed Bryce Terang of a home run in the 5th inning. Caleb Durbin then hitting a 103-mile-an-hour flyout with an 820 expected batting average. The Brewers had 11 hits and a 328 expected batting average. The Rangers had 7 hits and a 225 expected batting average. And this is where, when you're looking at something like that, it comes down to, maybe there was one big swing that went somebody's way and not the other. So Hellman's went for a home run. Terang's did not because it was robbed. That's kind of bad luck in one sense, but in another sense, it's getting beat by another team that's making really, really good plays to counter what you're doing. And then just not great sequencing, couple more walks in there from Patrick, just things like that. The sequencing not quite going in your favor there. So the Brewers doing a lot of good things on the offensive side. And I really think that over these last few weeks here, where the offense hasn't always been there like it was on the winning streak, I actually think from a process standpoint, they have had a lot of games where I think they've looked better than they did during that winning streak, or at least doing some things that are going to more reliably lead you to success than some of the breaks that were going their way during that winning streak. And that's the nature of the game too. Like, things even out. So if you have a stretch where things are going your way and maybe the results don't quite back up the process, then you can't complain too much when things flip around a couple weeks later and you are doing more things that should lead you to better results, but the results don't come. Like, that's the nature of the game. It swings both ways. But in the interest of actually like trying to put yourself in a position where you're going to be in a good spot, you would prefer the process is like as reliable as it can be.
Yeah, this is the type of process and the type of batted ball that is going to often net you a lot more than 4 runs in a game. Like, they were swinging the bat extremely well. And even on top of just generally, if they were in a different stadium, they would have scored a lot more runs this series in general. Like, it just was one of those bad combinations of where you're hitting the ball really well to the wrong part of the field. On top of that, the Rangers have been an incredibly good defensive team all season. I think in fielding run value, they lead the league by like 20 runs. So it's not close. Like, they've been really, really good defensively this year. And they showed it. They, like you said, they made a bunch of really good plays. The Brewers weren't quite as good in the field as we've seen them at times. I think we saw a little bit of the hesitation in center from Churio a couple times again that we've talked about in the past. And that's coming off of a hamstring injury. I don't even know if this one was as much about hesitating in potentially missing a ball, but maybe hesitating a little bit more in terms of selling out and going full bore after stuff, just coming off of an injury. But yeah, the Rangers played great defense. The Brewers didn't quite live up to their normal defensive standard. And also, like you said, I mean, at some point, some of this stuff just evens out and you have a really good process day and it doesn't go well. And sometimes you just string together 3 infield hits and an error, and all of a sudden you've got 3 runs on the board and you didn't really do anything that really deserved that offensively, but it happened. So it's just kind of the way of the game. But yeah, if they swing the bat like they did in that game, they will score a lot more runs than they did in this one more often than not.
Brewers would have another game get away from them in game 3 to finish the sweep. Rangers 6, Brewers 3. Bryce Terang and Jackson Churio led off the game with back-to-back home runs. Freddie Peralta then on the bump, coming off of a Pitcher of the Month award for August, trying to extend his scoreless streak. It was snapped with this outing. Couple innings to look at here, though. A 2-run 3rd inning for Freddie Peralta. He went strikeout and then single, 2 walks, a run-scoring fielder's choice, and then a run-scoring balk. So not the greatest inning for Freddie there. And then he would give up a 2-run home run to Jake Berger, Berger's second of the day. Berger was the one who snapped that scoreless streak with a home run a couple innings prior on what was actually a pretty good pitch. But this second one was not a good pitch. It was a mistake changeup right down the middle. Freddie knew it right away as soon as he let go of that ball. So 5 innings for Peralta, 6 hits, 5 earned runs, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts, 2 homers. And again, the pitch count just getting very, very high early in this game, even when he was keeping the Rangers off the board early. And Pat Murphy has been a little bit more open about it now these last couple outings about how, yeah, the pitch count thing is a thing. But he said after Freddie's last start at home that, it's the separator between being really good and being on like superstar level. But then it seemed like after this one, he was a little more blunt about it, and that, yes, this is something that he would be well served if he could shore this up. But again, I mean, I'm at the point where he's so far into his career that I just kind of think this is who he is. A little bit is in the nature of how he pitches because he's, a high strikeout guy, but a lot of it just comes back to, I think, the non-competitive misses with 2 strikes and prolonging a lot of counts that he doesn't need to. Because again, through those first 2 innings, 1 base runner, and he was already at almost 40 pitches. When you've only allowed one of the first 7 guys in the game to reach, like those are the moments is where, yes, it is, an issue with extending counts that don't need to be 5, 6, 7, 8 pitches.
Yeah, and Murph kind of specifically called out just the non-competitive high fastball misses, and that was something we talked about a lot last year, just being way too far above the zone. Like with a fastball like he has, if he can be around the top of the zone a little above, like he'll get some swings and he'll get some in zone whiffs if he's at the top of it, just with the way his fastball behaves and the fact that the velo can get into those mid 90s at a decent amount of the time. But if they're missing at the eyes, like you're just not going to get swings, and it's a very, very easy take for hitters. I think we've also in the past talked quite a bit about just the breaking balls, then along with that, missing pretty far outside, pretty far into the dirt where it's just not a competitive, they're not going to swing at it. And I mean, that's kind of what happened here. And I think at some point too, like that he was going to have a game where he just gave up some runs. Like everything had been going his way. He'd also been pitching extremely well on top of that, but he'd had a lot of things go his way. When he'd gotten into trouble, he'd been able to shake out of it pretty much every time. And that just doesn't continue. Like you can't constantly put yourself in trouble and get out of it every time. But with his stuff, he's a guy who can do it more often than others. But eventually it was going to catch up to him a little bit, and Berger ran into a couple of them. And then, like you said, that 3rd inning, he just kind of really let things snowball a little bit more than he has when he started to run into some trouble with walks. And that balk that one was pretty tough from a guy of his time in the league and how he's a vet at this point, and just having a dumb mistake like that was probably a little more frustrating than even some of the other stuff for me. But yeah, more than anything, I think at some point he was just going to give up some runs, and this happened to be the game where it kind of hit them all at once. But overall, still feeling quite good about what the Brewers have gotten from Freddie Peralta all season.
Brewers would grab a run back in the 6th on one of those Rhys Hoskins pinch hit situations. So he hit for Joey Ortiz 2 games in a row here late in the game against a righty, or late in the game, and he delivered here, pinch hit RBI single. That was it for the Brewers, though their offense would otherwise go quiet after that. Let's rattle through a couple of injury updates here really quickly. We'll start with Logan Henderson, who is still on the injured list, out for the remainder of the regular season. He was transferred to the 60-day a while back, but he's scheduled for a bullpen on Tuesday. That's September 16th, and he's still hoping to be in the mix for the playoff roster. DL Hall, it sounds like there's still an outside chance of him returning at the end of the month. He's playing catch at 75 feet. Nick Mears, who we mentioned is on the IL with that back issue, playing catch out to 105 feet. Brewers are targeting mid-September for his return, which would be coming up here. Trevor McGill then threw a live BP a couple days ago in Texas during that series, sat 94 to 96 reportedly. He's going to throw another one during the Cardinals series, and hopefully for the Brewers will return after that without a rehab assignment. Shelby Miller, he consulted with a doctor while in Texas. He's going to need surgery on that UCL, unsurprisingly. Sideline reporter Sophia Minert said that there's a possibility that it could be a internal brace surgery instead of the full UCL, which would cut his timeline down a little bit and make it easier for him to try a comeback attempt as he starts kind of getting into his mid to late 30s here. And finally, William Contreras, he was out of the lineup for Wednesday's series finale with a left forearm contusion after he was struck by a foul tip on Tuesday. Brewers are going to reevaluate him and see what his status is on Friday. Those are the injury updates. And then last thing I wanted to touch on here before we get into the minor league sandbox is a question that we got from Jackson on Twitter, who asked, what would you like to see out of the Brewers in the final 15 games that would make you feel most confident heading into the playoffs? So I think you need to be careful with this question because we've seen it time and time again. Like there really shouldn't be anything in particular, I think, that makes you feel good or more confident heading into the playoffs, because the playoffs are a crapshoot. We have seen teams go in on a heater and get bounced in the first round. We have seen teams go crashing into the playoffs and make it to the NLCS. Like, think of what the Phillies did a few years back. They basically stumbled backwards into the last wild card spot and made a deep run, and they won the pennant. So this thing goes both ways. I think just from a mental standpoint, really, I don't even care about the results that much. I think the Brewers are going to have that one of those top 2 seeds locked up, so they're going to get to go straight to the NLDS. Obviously, you can't have a full-scale collapse, but that's about what it would take, I think, at this point to keep them out of one of those top 2 spots. Really, what I just want to see, though, is that these guys still look engaged. That's really the only thing I care about, because I think the playoffs are so random that there's very little that you can confidently control. The one thing you can control is how engaged you are in the game. Do you have the mental switch and the competitive switch flipped on to the extent that it does need to be flipped on when you get into the playoffs? And like I said earlier, I don't think you can just do that on like the turn of a coin, so to speak. So I think the only thing to watch for really is, do these guys still look engaged? And, for as hard of a time as we give Pat Murphy a lot on this show, this is that one area where I feel very confident that he is not going to let this team slip out of that competitive mindset. I don't think that's going to be an issue. I can't say that that's going to lead them to playoff success because, again, it's such a crapshoot, but I don't think you need to worry about these guys getting off their game mentally over these last 15 going into the playoffs. And again, that's really the only thing that I have any concern about, that I am watching for. But again, I don't think it's going to happen, especially with this manager.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, this isn't really something you'd see on the field, but just getting healthy is obviously the other part of that, and getting McGill back and seeing that he can perform and that he holds up after returning from injury. And if Mears can be kind of what we were hoping to see a little more consistently at times this year, and when he returns, and if maybe the back has been a bit of a problem throughout the middle part of the season, maybe the velo ticks back up a couple, that would be great if I'm looking for specific things. But like, I'm with you. I want to see them compete, and I guess just from a process standpoint, I do want to see them experiment with some things and see what they can find in terms of like what could be a good strategic way to attack a playoff game. And I think we saw that in this Rangers series a little bit with some of the pinch hitting. Like, you get Rhys Hoskins back. Now you pinch hit him for the shortstop, and now you can put Monasterio in. You've got Isaac Collins, who can come in and play third base if you want to hit for Durbin, whether it's Collins hitting or it's Collins moving from left to third and stuff like that. Like, I want to see them see what works in these moments and see what they can be comfortable with in the playoffs. So that's kind of the stuff I'll be looking for. But I'm with you. I mean, I'm not ever going to say they have anything locked up until it's locked up, but they're in a very good spot, and they just need to make sure that, compete, get healthy, stay healthy as much as you can, control that. And then more than anything else, I just want to see them see what works as best as they can. Obviously, nothing's a sure thing, but just finding different different combinations. And it goes back to the Yoho thing. Like that's a spot where I would have liked to see them take this opportunity to use that and get him opportunities to see if he could help in the playoffs. But otherwise, that's pretty much it. I'm with you. I don't think a slow ending in terms of results is going to matter to me. A really hot finish this season's really not going to give me any more confidence. I just want to see good process, good will to compete throughout the entire regular season, and then don't ever flip that switch off, because you never know if you can flip it right back on for the playoffs, like you said.
It's going to do it for us this week for big league coverage, which means it's now time to close things out with Spencer's minor league sandbox. He did not put the notes in our shared document that we use, which means I am totally at the whims of whatever he has planned here, and I'm going to find out along with the audience here what we're about to experience.
All right. Well, I've got a decent amount, but it's nothing crazy. The AFL assignments we'll go through in a second added a little bit to the sandbox this week, but we'll start with a question from Douglas, who asked, if you could add 3 miles per hour to any pitching prospect's fastball this offseason, who would it be? It's a very good question. I'm going to cheat. I'm going to give you a final answer, but I'm going to throw a few out. If I were trying to create like a guy who's kind of on the fringes of prospectum, and I don't know if that's a word, but fringes of being a prospect, I would probably throw it on Melvin Hernandez, who I've seen in like the upper 80s, low 90s, but it's a great sinker movement wise. It's got a really good changeup to pair with it, and then a pretty nice breaking ball to go with it as well. I think if he was sitting like 94 or 95, you start looking at a future legitimate starter. And I think that's a possibility that he'll add that. He's 18 currently, if not maybe just turned 19. The other one that I'll throw out as a possibility, not my final answer, is Jaron DeBerry, who I've talked about a decent amount of late. If you get mid 90s from DeBerry's fastball that has a negative 4.1 vertical approach angle, nasty breaking balls that spin 3,000 RPMs, big time improved changeup, improved sinker, cutters in a good spot. If you get him to sitting, we've seen 94 in AA. You get him to sitting like 95, touching 97. That's a really good prospect, especially with the lean frame and everything that he has. I think he gets pretty decent extension. But my real answer is a guy that has very, very good extension, and it's Bishop Letson. I'm going to talk about him a little bit more in depth when I get to the pitcher section, but this is a guy with big time extension, 7.5 feet of extension. He's already sitting in the 94 range as a 20-year-old. He just made his AA debut yesterday. But he's already sitting 94. He'll touch 96. Huge extension, solid slider, solid cutter, solid changeup. He has a 4-seam and a 2-seam. You get him sitting 97, touching 99, maybe even 100. With that type of extension, you're talking about a pretty similar pitcher to Miz. Like, this is not that much different if you get to that point. So if you give him the 3 miles per hour, I think you turn him into like one of the top pitching prospects in all of baseball. So he would be my answer, but the other two would be interesting just in terms of creating more of like a true prospect out of him. But moving to, we got the Arizona Fall League assignments, and I wrote about all 7 of the guys assigned on Brewer Fanatic, so you can read a little bit more in depth on them there, and also some of the names I've talked about a bunch. But Marco Dingus is the catcher that they are sending there this year. I've talked about him a lot. The bat has been awesome. The defense, in my opinion, has a very, very good chance of sticking at catcher and being pretty solid with the athleticism that he has. Really strong arm. He's got to clean stuff up, but he's a very raw catcher at this point in terms of just experience at the spot. So I'm pretty confident he's going to figure it out. Josh Adamshevsky, another personal favorite of mine, a guy I've talked about a ton. Love the bat. Again, I think there's potential for an above average hit tool, above average power. He makes good swing decisions, like great swing decisions from what I've heard actually to this point in his career. And I really like the swing, just always have. The interesting part of his assignment is that he is listed as an outfielder. He did play 4 games in left field in high A after his brief promotion to end the season. I think this is something they really want to see if he can do. Now, he holds his own at second base. I think he'd be fine at second base. But there are so many middle infield prospects, and a bunch of them who probably have a higher defensive ceiling and interesting offensive ability as well. giving him an opportunity in left field or in the outfield in general, I think is a nice way to potentially add some, not just versatility, but also there's a lack of outfielders in the Brewers system at the moment. Obviously, at the big league level, that doesn't shine through very clearly, but in the lower levels of the minors, it's pretty bare in terms of outfield depth. So getting him an opportunity out there, I think that's the main reason he's being sent there, but he did miss a decent amount of time. So it also gives him some extra at bats. Luke Adams also missed a good amount of time. Another personal favorite of mine, has been very, very good in Double-A as a 20-year-old to start the year, 21 since the end of April. He was the 5th youngest player in the Southern League on opening day, and he's got a 165 WRC plus on the whole for the season. So he's been fantastic. He's got power. He's a good athlete for his height and his size, and it'll be interesting to see what he's down there for. I'm curious if he'll be getting some more reps at third base because he played a lot of first this year with Brock Wilken playing third for the Shuckers. I think third base is still within possibilities for him. Like, I think he could play it. So getting him reps there that he didn't really get this year would be an interesting way to kind of use this opportunity. And like I said, both him and Adam Shevsky missed some time with injuries, as did Dinges this year. So I think all of that plays a role there. On the pitcher side, Jesus Broca, I talked about a few weeks ago. He's one of the pitchers I saw in person in Appleton. Interesting lefty. He will be Rule 5 eligible next winter. He's gone from Carolina all the way up to Biloxi this year. He had a velo jump from kind of upper. He had the Melvin Hernandez velo jump I'm hoping to see in the future. He went from 89 to 91 to kind of sitting 92 to 94. He touched 96 this year. Interesting delivery that hides the ball well. The changeup was always his best pitch, and that stayed the same even with the velo jump. The changeup velo didn't really change, so even more separation between the velocity on the fastball and changeup is really good to see. Also shows pretty good command of a 80-mile-per-hour breaking ball. The interesting part for me on this one is that he has already surpassed his career high in innings by over 45 innings. So he was a multi-inning reliever this year. I wonder if they're going to have him start next year, and that's why they want to stretch it a little bit further. Another lefty, Anthony Flores. He spent all season with the Timber Rattlers. He started as a starter, and then he ended up out of the bullpen for about the second half of the season. He sits in the upper 80s. It's a lack of velocity that he kind of makes up for by using a cutter as his primary pitch. He throws a pretty good changeup as well. I'm curious because he also surpassed his career high in innings already this year, but again, maybe they're hoping to make him a full-time starter next year, so they want to get a few more innings out of him. An interesting name, a non-drafted free agent this year, Michael Fowler, was added as one of the relievers that'll be going there. This guy's got good stuff. Now, he struggled in college. He spent time at 3 different universities. He started at LSU, then he went to Tulane, and then he ended up at Southern Miss. He walked about 7 per 9, walk rate over 15% for his career, but he also struck out batters at a very high clip. He really didn't get hit much. He's throwing in the upper 90s. I've seen 99 from him in the past. I saw 97, 98 a few times in Carolina. It's got pretty good carry, decent vertical approach angle. It's even got a little bit of like that cut carry type of action to it. And then he throws a pretty big time curveball in the 80-mile-per-hour range, as well as kind of his 2 offerings. So he's relief only probably, but an interesting arm that I'll be excited to maybe get some more StatCast data on. Edwin Jimenez is a guy who was kind of creeping his way onto the prospect list a couple years ago. He got hurt a few weeks into the 24 season, missed the rest of that year, and missed all of this season. So this is an opportunity to just get him reps. But last time he was healthy, he was 27th on Fangraphs Brewers list. So there was something here. Low 90s fastball, but he throws a really, really nice looking curveball with kind of that 2-plane break, high spin. It was a good out pitch for him, and he was working on a pretty good changeup as well. Then the final name is Brett Witrowski. That's a name we've talked about a lot before. Starter this year in Biloxi. He's going to surpass 100 innings. We've seen the velo up to 99. He was hitting 99 in the 4th inning of one of his starts I think it was last week. I don't love the fastball shape from what I've seen. I think getting some StatCast data on it would probably be nice to have. So hopefully he pitches some games on StatCast fields. But Really good breaking stuff. I'm curious if they're going to try and kind of see how he looks in a relief role in the AFL. But those are all the names. And that's a little bit about him. Like I said, I went more in depth at Brewer Fanatic, so you can see it there. I quote tweeted it today. So if you want to find it on my profile, you can find it there. But we got a question from Jackson about the AFL, asking, what are you looking forward to most in the AFL? Additionally, when you are evaluating player performances, how big of a jump can these guys realistically make in the AFL since it's only a month and a half? So the most interesting thing for me to follow is Adam Shevsky in the outfield. I want to see how it looks. I want to see how scouts kind of view it. I also just kind of want to hear how scouts view him at the plate, just seeing him against a little bit higher competition and more consistently, probably a little more consistent velo than he saw in the lower levels, but just generally, he's the guy I'll be most interested to follow. Also, just getting StatCast data on guys, like I mentioned, for any pitchers that we can get it. In terms of the second part of that question, I don't think there's a huge jump anyone can really make. For a guy like Dingus, the catcher defense could take a step up by getting more consistent reps, maybe having a more of a focus on it in the AFL. And I think that would really help a lot of people's view of him. For me, he's already 5th on the Brewers list, so I don't think he's jumping much higher than that from an AFL stint. But if someone has him in like the mid-teens and they like what they see defensively, I could see him moving up a list because of that. So that's kind of the stuff that does it. A guy like Michael Fowler, no one's really talking about, so maybe he shows some stuff and people start looking at him as a future reliever, but even that's not usually something that's super exciting in terms of prospect lists. So there's not usually a ton you can see. Similar to Dingus' defense, like if Adam Shevsky looks like a natural in the outfield and it's clear that's his spot, that might help. Luke Adams looks like he can genuinely handle third base, that might help him, but I don't think the offensive output's usually going to help you make much of a jump. I guess that's probably the best way to say it. But that can lead us into, I got a few hitters and a few pitchers to round it out today. So Eric Batanti finished his season really strong. In September, he had a 1348 OPS to close out the Carolina season. He had a homer, he had 2 doubles, and he walked 9 times to only 4 strikeouts, which was really nice to see. The whiffs and the strikeouts came down a bit as the season progressed, still way too high on the whole. But he is 19 still. He won't turn 20 until around Thanksgiving. So there's a lot to like here in terms of the power, and you just got to see. I think next year you really need to start seeing the whiffs and strikeouts start to come down a bit. But for now, I think he's still worthy of quite a bit of attention just with all the raw tools that he possesses. Andrew Fisher, the first round pick this year, he also finished strong with an 1184 OPS in September with 3 doubles and a triple. Kalen Nikasi, I've talked about before. He had a strong finish to the season, 1147 OPS in September. Nikasi is a guy who, for me, has always been somebody who, when I watch him, he looks like a better player than his numbers have ever really shown. He does have whiff problems, but I think he makes good swing decisions. So if he can figure out some of the bat to ball skills, he shows some raw power. He's shown some speed. He's got a cannon of an arm in the outfield. There's interesting stuff there, but he definitely needs to start making more contact for it to mean anything. But he also had 2 doubles and a homer in September. And then Jesus Mate got pushed to AA. We haven't talked about that since that happened. He's basically following the Churio path, but again, 2 months younger than Churio was at every step of the way. And so far in his first 2 games, he's gone 4 for 11 with a triple and a stolen base. He definitely looks the part already. Like there will be some struggles, and we saw that with Churio at the AA level. Like there are going to be some struggles, but by no means does he look overmatched. Does he look like he's being out physicaled by anybody at the AA level? Like he looks the part for sure. And this is the ceiling on Mate is just incredibly high. I mean, you're talking similar to what Churio was, but like a switch hitting potential, very good defensive shortstop. That's pretty special. That's like Francisco Lindor, prime Francisco Lindor type of production that you could be looking at if things break right for Mate. And I think he's very much on the right path. And then finally, the last hitter we'll talk about is Matt Wood. In September at AA, he has an 851 OPS with a double. He's got a 5 walks to 4 strikeouts. On the whole in AA, since he moved up there a little earlier than midseason this year, I think, he's got a 272, 370, and a 421 slash. good for a 791 OPS. So that's a 134 WRC plus for Matt Wood. He has also thrown out 27.3% of stolen base attempts at AA, which is a huge step up from where he was at the lower levels. I think having pitchers that have a little bit of a better grasp on holding runners has helped a lot. But this is a guy that I was admittedly not very high on coming into the year, and he's shown a lot at AA, where I'm kind of having to just take another look at him. He's going to be one guy that in the offseason I probably dive into a little bit more and start to look at it closer and see if I need to move him back up my list. But that's the final hitter. We've got 3 pitchers to go through. So I mentioned Bishop Letson earlier. He made his first AA start. Second youngest player to ever make a start for the Shuckers since they've been around for about a decade now. He was up to 96.5 miles per hour. The sweeper looked nasty. I posted a bunch of video of the sweepers. His first 5 strikeouts in AA all came on the sweeper. He ended up kind of wearing down a little bit. You could see the command go a little bit. He's coming off an injury. He's only pitched a few times since that. But he ended up giving up a couple walks, and then he gave up a grand slam, and that kind of ruined the line. But overall, 4 innings, 6 strikeouts, 3 walks, and that grand slam for 4 earned runs. But the stuff absolutely looked like it belonged, and we got some information on the actual stuff in terms of how it moves that I'll share quickly here. But it's pretty special. I mentioned the 7.5 foot extension. It's got a 5.3 foot release height. On the whole, it's been just really, really solid work for a 20-year-old. But the 4-seam sits 93.6 currently as his average. It's got 16 inches of induced vertical break, but from that release height and that extension, that plays quite well. 11 inches of arm side movement as well. It gets a 110 stuff plus on the model so far. His sinker sits 92.5. It's got 10 inches of induced vertical break with 17 inches of arm side run. Gets a 109 stuff plus. His changeup sits 86. It's got 8 inches of induced vertical break with 18 inches of arm side run. 102 stuff plus on the changeup. The sweeper, -3 induced vertical break with 16 inches of glove side movement. That got a 106 stuff plus grade. And then while he was hurt, he added a cutter, brought it back, and he throws it 89.5 miles per hour on average so far. It's got 7 inches of induced vertical break with 0 inches of horizontal, and that got a 104 stuff plus grade. So this is a 20-year-old with outlier release extension, and he's already got 5 pitches that all grade out quite well. And I think there's more velo in the tank. I think he is going to start getting into more velo. I don't know if he'll get the 3 miles per hour on average that I was asked about, but I could very easily see him sitting in like that 95 range next year instead of 93.6 on the fastball. And yeah, if he hadn't gotten hurt, he'd be my top pitching prospect in the organization. Right now, he's just behind Tyson Harden, but very, very good stuff from him. Robert Gasser, we've mentioned a couple times. I think we're going to see him when he's ready and able to be called up this next time. But since he moved into the bullpen, lower usage type of role, he's thrown 7 1/3 innings. He's allowed 6 hits in that time, only 1 walk. He struck out 8. He looks very comfortable in the role already. He's come out of the bullpen. He's shown that he can do it in that role. He's going to help the Brewers, I think, and I think they're going to bring him up, like I said, when those 15 days are up, or even maybe at the next injury. I just think they're going to find a way to replace Fetty, and then the innings they've gotten from like Carlos Rodriguez. One of them has to be replaced with Gasser when he is eligible to be. And then the final one I'll talk about here is Alexander Corniel. When Letson got promoted to AA, Corniel got promoted to AAA. He's had a little bit of a breakout season that kind of wore off as the season progressed. He had a velo jump, didn't really show up in the first AAA game. I think he has worn down, like I said. But first AAA outing, he goes 4 2/3. He gives up 3 hits. He does walk 4, but he only allowed 1 earned run, and he struck out 7 in those 4 2/3 as well. So the stuff, it's a -4.1 vertical approach angle. It's got pretty good carry. He got up to 20 inches of induced vertical break on the 4-seam and kind of sat more in like that 16-17 range. He's got a true slider. He's got a cutter that he mixes in the upper 80s. That slider's more in the low 80s. He's got a bigger curveball that he throws in the upper 70s. And then he also has a pretty decent changeup that he didn't use much, but honestly had like, it's pretty high spin. It doesn't take a ton off. I actually wonder if it's maybe a kick change type of changeup, but it was 87 miles per hour, but it had 17 inches of horizontal break, and he killed the vert on it pretty decently. So it's an interesting mix. And I'd seen him up to 96 in AA. He did not hit that in this outing. It really didn't come all that close. But we've seen the velo higher this year. He's interesting. He's a Rule 5, or he's Rule 5 eligible this offseason. I don't really think they're going to protect him. I'd be kind of surprised if they did. But I wouldn't be shocked if someone took a chance on him. It's decent stuff. There's a true kind of starters mix here. A lot of things that he can do. I think throwing the curveball with more depth, more consistently might not be the worst idea for him, but interesting arm that really didn't get much attention this year because of how many prospects performed, and he didn't blow anyone away, and he's a little older than most prospects would be, but I think it's an arm that the Brewers probably like a decent amount and see something in. So wouldn't shock me if they are, even if he's not protected, if he's somebody that we end up seeing at the big league level for somebody at some point. So good debut for him there. And yeah, that is all I've got this week.
It wasn't too bad. I thought maybe you'd get carried away with the AFL stuff, but
luckily I have the article to fall back on, so I could just call to that, push people there. Or I would have. I absolutely would have.
Yes. All right. There you go. That saved us a little bit of time. Thank you all for listening this week. I feel like I'm saying this at the end of every week now, but we got an interesting stretch coming up here down the stretch run for the regular season into the playoffs. We talked a little bit more on this episode. I feel like this is the first time we went into how we actually think the Brewers should navigate the rest of this stretch here, kind of what we're wanting to see from these next 2 weeks leading into October, and we'll see how it all unfolds. We'll be back with you next Friday to break down all of the action on the Brewer Fanatic podcast. Thank you for listening.